My name is Harold Thompson. I'm 70 years old and I live in Mississippi. What I'm about to share is an experience that I can hardly believe myself. Every Christian needs to hear my story, or they may end up facing the same fate I did. It was October 12th, just 2 months ago, and I remember that day like it was yesterday. I had set out early that morning to pick up some parts for my tractor. The sky was gray, but it didn't look like rain. The air was cool, and a gentle breeze wafted through the streets. After running my errands, I tossed the parts into the back seat and began my drive home. An old country song played on the radio. Though I can't recall the name, the melody still echoes in my mind. The road was nearly empty, and as I approached an intersection, I glanced around. Everything was quiet. I pressed the gas pedal lightly, but then I heard a hum from my left. Turning my head, I saw it. A dirty old yellow Mustang with its headlights glaring. I noticed it a moment too late. Suddenly, the engine's growl was deafening, and it felt like time slowed down. I could see every detail, the rust spots on its grille, the cracked headlights, and the dust-covered hood. I couldn't make out the driver's face, but I saw his hands gripping the wheel tightly. And then, it happened. The screeching of brakes pierced the air, and everything spiraled out of control. I was thrown to the side, and in an instant, everything flipped upside down. I felt a scream rising inside me, but no sound came out. For a brief moment, everything faded to silence. I shut my eyes, and the last thing I felt was my body hitting the cold asphalt. Then, everything exploded into a sharp white flash. It lit up my closed eyes like I was staring straight into the sun. I tried to shut my eyes tighter, but it was futile. They were already closed. Flashes continued to burst at random intervals. One on my left, one straight ahead, one behind me. I tried to move, but I couldn't feel my neck. My body felt suspended in midair. Each flash came with a thunderous sound, then silence again. I had no idea if my heart was beating or if I was even alive, just that the flashes and deep sounds reverberated through me. Eventually, shapes began to form in the flashes. At first, they were ambiguous, and I tried to figure out what they were. Was it a tree? A person? No, they weren't either. They morphed into swirling smoke that somehow took on body-like shapes. They floated around me, moving slowly in circles before stopping abruptly. The silence was absolute, and then, as if on cue, they rushed at me, grasping my arms and legs with cold hands. Neither leather nor gloves, but a damp chill that felt like wet soil. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I tried to shout, "Stop! What are you doing?" But every word got lodged in my throat. "Time to be cleaned," they said in unison, not with their mouths, but echoing straight into my mind. The realization hit me. This was not good. They were dragging me to a place I could only dread. I felt myself being pulled somewhere. I wasn't walking, my feet never touched the ground. The flashes continued, and each one revealed more faces. Faces devoid of eyes, mouths, or noses. Yet I could sense their gaze upon me, judging me. They took me to a room shrouded in darkness. I cannot describe its walls, but I could feel their presence. Suddenly, I felt my bare feet pressing against a damp surface. When had they lowered me? I didn't have time to think. That same voice echoed again. Time to be cleaned. At that moment, something was poured over me, cold and sharp, like knives piercing my lungs. It wasn't water. It had a smell that combined sulfur, rust, and the scent of rotting flesh. The stench was unbearable, and I thought my nose would break from the intensity. This liquid burned my skin. It switched from cold to hot, and then to a searing pain. "Stop! Stop!" I screamed, but once again, my voice was drowned out. The hands were still there, moving over my back and limbs, rubbing against me with something rough and gritty. It felt like they were scratching at my skin, tearing into it. My eyes stung. The white flashes had stopped, replaced by a disturbing crimson glow. I breathed in the hot, humid air, finding it difficult to draw in breath, as if I was inhaling hot dust. I pressed my hands to the ground, a combination of hard rock and something softer, but not entirely. Numerous pillars rose high above me, and fiery red flames flickered in the dark corners. I looked up, unable to gauge how far the ceiling was, but moans echoed from all directions, close, far, all around me. Some were crying, some were screaming, some whispering, but I couldn't understand any of it. When I glanced forward, I was horrified to see them. Men in white hoods, the Ku Klux Klan encircling the shadows. They stood as statues, and for a moment, I caught sight of their eyes beneath the hoods. I felt frozen as if something gripped my throat. Then I recognized them, an old friend. "This is a mistake," I whispered, and for the first time, my voice came through. "This has to be a mistake." Suddenly, a figure surged into the center of the arena. Adolf Hitler himself. Yes, that Hitler. He was short with cold, pitch-black eyes, berating a man cowering in a corner, trembling with his head in his hands. Hitler pointed a finger, and two large creatures seized this poor man, dragging him toward the center. "Please forgive me. I won't do it again," the man cried, but no one listened. They laid him down on something that looked like stone, and I felt the horror wash over me as one of the creatures brandished a massive hammer. They were going to break the man's hands. I couldn't bear to watch any longer. I fell to my knees, the flames searing my skin as I trembled. The heat felt like it was drawing forth every flaw, every sin from within me. I closed my eyes, but it was pointless. The memories came in vivid flashes. The first memory that hit me was of my childhood neighbor, Samuel. I could see him, a young boy playing in the dirt road with his wooden toy car. I held my shiny new metal truck, watching him as his eyes locked on mine. I had never realized until that moment how long I'd remembered that look, the yearning in his eyes. He never asked for anything. He didn't have to. In my heart, I thought he'd never have a toy like mine. Why? Because he was Samuel. Even as children, I harbored those prejudices. I always believed I was better than Samuel. Then the scene shifted abruptly to a Sunday after church. As I was leaving the building, I noticed a black family passing by. The mother was carrying a baby who was crying, and just like the other white men around me, I glanced at them with disdain. A part of me whispered, "Why does this matter to you?" But I silenced that nagging voice. I rolled my eyes and shared a chuckle with the others as we walked right past them, not bothering to even look at her face. Now, in this strange place, I could see her clearly, the details etched into my mind. Her tired eyes, the sweat on her brow, and the helplessness that surrounded her as she cradled her crying baby. When our eyes met, I didn't see anger. I saw the gaze of a woman who had nothing left. "I'm not a bad person," I tried to convince myself, reaching my hands toward her. "I was never like that. People did these things. Everyone was like that back then." But then the thud returned, exploding inside my head. My vision darkened, yet the images kept coming. It was summer, and I was in my 20s, working the fields with my tractor. I had spotted Samuel walking to town, a sack slung over his back, covered in dust. I could have slowed down and offered him a ride, but the thought never even crossed my mind. Instead, I thought, he needs to take care of his own business. I watched him disappear into the dust, never giving it a second thought. But here, in this torment, I was forced to relive that moment again and again, watching him struggle with that heavy sack on his shoulders. I fell to my knees, crying out, "What do you want from me?" My throat felt like it was being ripped apart. "I'm just an ordinary man. I never beat anyone. I didn't hurt anyone." In response, more flashes burst around me, not white this time, but red. My eyes were drawn to the center of the scene. At first, I didn't recognize who was there, but then it became painfully clear. It was me. I was on that cross, hands tied and feet nailed down. "That's not me," I shouted, but no one paid me any mind. Samuel's voice caught my ear. "Don't you think you deserve this punishment?" he asked, his eyes darkening. "How many times did you look away when they called for help? How often did you stay silent while they suffered? How many times did you just walk away?" "I'm not a bad person," I repeated over and over, each utterance weighing heavier on my tongue until it felt like stones lodged in my throat. As I shouted, the world around me began to collapse, and slowly I awakened. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was a soft, warm white glow. This time, it wasn't a flash. It was a flickering hospital ceiling light. Breathing was hard. I had a tube in my nose and wires wrapped around my arms. I turned my head and looked out the window. Sunlight flooded in. Tears filled my eyes. "I'm alive," I mumbled, my voice hoarse and shaky. Then it all rushed back to me. Samuel, the white hoods, the cross. Those visions spun through my mind, but this time they felt different. I wasn't escaping them. They were seared into my memory. Shame washed over me, not the kind I could hide from others, but the kind I could never escape from myself. The hospital room was quiet, save for the beeping of the heart monitor. Yet in my head, the voice echoed, "The greatest punishment is to truly see yourself." In that moment, I knew what I had to do. When I left the hospital, I wasn't the same person. The sun outside was blinding, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I felt its warmth. The sky was a vast blue, clearer than I had ever seen it before, and I stared at that light, letting the tears flow without shame. Then, one thought crossed my mind. It's time to finish what's been left undone. My first step was to walk to a door I had ignored for years, Samuel's house. With each step, my knees shook, and I wanted to turn back. I thought, maybe I don't have to do this. But that voice in my head insisted. The greatest punishment is to truly see yourself. Turning back was no longer an option. When I reached the door, I hesitated. I held my breath and knocked. The sound echoed, heavier than I expected. Inside, I prayed, please let it be Samuel. Please let him be the one to answer. And this time, my prayers were answered. Samuel opened the door, we locked eyes, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I felt stripped bare, standing there face to face. I took off my hat, fidgeting with it, feeling the weight of decades on my shoulders. My tongue felt tied, as if I were searching for the right words, but what I needed to say was far from ordinary. "Samuel," I finally said, my voice cracking. I looked down, then quickly lifted my gaze. "I need to say something." His expression didn't change. He just tilted his head slightly, silently inviting me to continue. That look weighed heavier than anything I had experienced in the darkness. The words were trapped in my throat, but I pushed through. I've spent years ignoring things. Not just you, but others too, and even myself. Saying those words felt like a nail being driven into me, just like on that cross. But it was time to pull that nail out. "I'm sorry, Samuel. I'm truly sorry." As those two words escaped my lips, something inside me broke. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and it felt as though the weight I had carried for so long finally fell away. Samuel's face remained unchanged, but then he did something remarkable. He placed his hand on my shoulder. That simple gesture lifted every burden I had ever carried. It's hard to explain what I felt in that moment. Warmth, lightness, but more than anything, I felt human. "Come inside," he said, and that's when I took the heaviest step of my life. I crossed the threshold for the first time as a true human being. From that day on, I established a new routine. Each morning, I would wake up, get out of bed, and stand in front of the mirror. But this time, I didn't avoid my reflection. I looked at it directly and studied my own face. Each morning, I told myself, today, I will be a better man. Over time, some people noticed the changes in me. Some accepted it, others were skeptical. "What happened to you, Harold?" they would ask, but I didn't feel the need to explain. I knew the answer for myself. Some old friends criticized me, saying, "You've changed, you used to be stronger." But I understood now that the strength I had always prided myself on was simply cowardice. Silence is not strength, and I knew that now. One day, I spotted a man walking along the road by my field, his shirt dusty and worn, a sack slung over his shoulder. The image pulled me back to the past. It was just like the day I saw Samuel. I hesitated for just a moment, but this time, I didn't let it linger. I jumped off the tractor and walked toward him. "Hey," I called out. "You headed somewhere? Let me give you a ride." The man paused, looking tired but managing a smile. He lowered the sack from his shoulder and set it on the ground. I picked it up for him, and in that moment, I felt the weight on my back lighten just a bit. "God bless you," I whispered to myself. And it's something I say every morning moving forward, every time I look in the mirror, every time I work the fields, every time I think of that cross. God bless you all.